Some love stories are like epic poems. They've got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it just clicks, leaving you feeling satisfied. And then there are other stories, the ones that are more like a single perfect, unfinished verse. A story that ends so abruptly it leaves an echo, a ghost that lingers in the halls of TV history long after the credits roll. This was the love story that felt different. It was a story of two leaders forged in fire and blood who found their equal in a brutal, unforgiving world. It felt like a promise, but the promise was broken, leaving behind a legacy of heartbreak, outrage, and a story that, years later, still haunts the fans who lived it. This is the story of Clarke Griffin and Lexa and why their unfinished love became one of the most powerful and important tragedies in modern television. When Clarke Griffin, leader of the Sky People, and Lexa, commander of the Allied Grounder clans, first met, they were enemies. Their initial alliance was purely strategic, a truce to deal with the threat inside Mount Weather. There was no trust, just a shared enemy. The tension between them was thick, with each young leader shouldering impossible choices and the weight of their people's survival. Yet, in that crucible of war, something else started to grow. It wasn't romance, not at first, it was respect. In a world that demanded strength above all, Clarke and Lexa saw their own struggles reflected in each other. They were both generals and survivors who understood the crushing loneliness of command. Lexa, who once declared love is weakness after the brutal murder of her former lover, Kostya, started showing a vulnerability she hid from the world. Clarke, in turn, saw past the stoic commander and glimpsed the young woman beneath the war paint. Their dynamic wasn't built on flirting, it was built on debate. They challenged each other's philosophies. Clarke desperately tried to cling to mercy, and Lexa, with her hardened pragmatism, the philosophy of blood must have blood, was the law of the land. But Clarke's very presence started to poke holes in that dogma. Lexa, meanwhile, forced Clarke to face the brutal realities of leadership, where every choice has a cost, and innocence is a luxury that you just can't afford. The foundation of mutual respect was the fertile ground where their relationship took root. It was a slow burn built on shared glances across war rooms, quiet talks about the ghosts of their pasts, and the gradual realization that they understood one another in a way that nobody else could. They were equals, and in a world defined by chaos, that was a powerful anchor. And it was this profound connection that made what happened next both inevitable and utterly devastating. Just as their alliance was finally becoming something like trust, and just after Lexa admitted her feelings for Clarke, the whole thing just fell apart. At the gates of Mount Weather, right on the edge of their shared victory, Lexa made a choice. She chose her people. In exchange for the release of the Grounders, she abandoned Clarke and the Sky People, leaving them to face the mountain alone. The betrayal was absolute. From a commander's point of view, it was logical, strategic, but for a friend, it was a soul-crushing blow. For Clarke, it was a wound that cut deeper than any blade. It forced her to make her own impossible choice, to irradiate Mount Weather and become one header, the commander of death. She was left shattered, not just by Lexa's abandonment, but by the monster she feared she'd become. When they met again in Polis, the Grounder capital, you could still feel the poison of that betrayal in the air. Clarke, seething with rage and grief, wanted Lexa to pay. Yet even in her anger, that connection wouldn't die. Lexa didn't make excuses for her decision, she owned it as a leader. But for the first time, she expressed deep regret for the pain that it caused Clarke personally. The road to forgiveness wasn't easy. It was paved with political games, assassination attempts, and the constant threat of war. But through it all, Lexa showed she had fundamentally changed. Inspired by Clarke, she began to champion a new philosophy. Blood must not have blood. It was a radical idea, and it was a direct testament to Clarke's influence. Lexa risked everything, her power and her life, for a philosophy of peace that Clarke had awakened within her. It was this evolution that allowed Clarke to finally see past the betrayal and to the woman she had become to respect. In quiet moments between crises, they found their way back to each other, and it all culminated not in some grand declaration, but in a quiet, intimate surrender. They finally consummated their relationship, a moment of pure peace and joy in a lifetime of war, and it felt like the ultimate payoff for the entire arc. After all the pain, the conflict, and everything they've been through, it was forgiveness, and it was a promise finally kept. In a glimmer of hope, even in their broken world, love and peace were possible, a joy that would only last a few short hours. Moments after finding that happiness, Lexa was killed, and it wasn't by a warrior's sword in a great battle. It wasn't a death befitting a commander. She died from a stray bullet, fired by her own mentor who was trying to kill Clarke. It was random, meaningless, and it happened right after she and Clarke had finally been together. The ultimate joy was immediately followed by the ultimate tragedy. For a massive and deeply invested audience, this wasn't just a sad plot twist. No, it felt like a slap in the face. Lexa's death ignited a firestorm of outrage, turning a fan complaint into a national conversation. And why? Because it played directly into a narrative pattern known as bury your gays, where LGBTQ plus characters are killed off at a shockingly high rate, often just to fuel the emotional growth of a straight character. Lexa's death became one of the most high-profile examples of this trope in modern television, and fans felt betrayed. The show's creators had heavily promoted the Clexa relationship, building it up as a central part of the season, only to tear it down in the most cliched and painful way. The showrunner later admitted that this aggressive promotion only fueled a feeling of betrayal. Pain was compounded by what fans dubbed as the spring slaughter. It was a period in 2016 where an alarming number of lesbian and bisexual female characters were killed off across different TV shows. But Lexa's death just hit different. She wasn't some minor character. She was a powerful, beloved leader whose relationship with Clarke was celebrated for its complexity. Killing her in such a careless way, right after a moment of profound happiness, sent a message, whether it was intended or not. And that was, for queer characters, joy is just fleeting, and tragedy is inevitable. The story was left unfinished, not by narrative necessity, but by a harmful trope that invalidated the emotional investment of its audience. The outrage that followed Lexa's death was unlike anything the fandom had ever seen before. It didn't just fizzle out online. It organised and it mobilised. It became a movement under the banner LGBT fans deserve better. Fans channeled their anger into real action. They raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for the Trevor Project, a suicide prevention organisation for the LGBTQ youth. They brought billboards to get their message out and took the fight directly to the network. This was way more than just a reaction to a TV show. It was a demand for accountability. It fundamentally changed the conversation around the LGBTQ plus representation. Bury your gays was no longer a niche academic term. It became a mainstream talking point, forcing creators and executives to confront their own storytelling biases. The most powerful monument of this legacy is ClexaCon. What started as an idea for a small fan meetup exploded into what became the first and largest multi-fandom convention for LGBTQ women and allies. Named for Clarke and Lexa, the conversation was a celebration of the very representation that fans were fighting for. It was a positive, empowering space born directly from the ashes of that tragic storyline, a place to celebrate queer characters and creators. It proved that this audience wasn't a small minority, but a powerful community that deserved better stories. Ironically, the unfinished nature of Clarke and Lexa's story is exactly why the legacy is so profound. A happy ending would have been nice, but this tragic, unjust end became a catalyst. It galvanized a generation of fans, teaching them that their voices mattered and that they could demand change from the media that they love. Lexa's legacy is twofold. In the show, she was the commander who fought for peace, but in the real world, her death sparked a revolution in fandom, a movement that continues to fight for the meaningful, respectful, and joyful representation that she and Clarke were so tragically denied. The story of Clarke and Lexa haunts us because it's a story of what if. What if they'd gotten their moment of peace? And what if their love had been allowed to redefine their brutal world? It haunts us because their end felt like a betrayal, not just of the characters, but of the audience that loved them. But the story doesn't really end with a stray bullet, no. It ends with a global community rising up to say that we deserve better. It ends with real world change, with a convention hall full of people celebrating the very thing that they were told they couldn't have. The unfinished verse of Clexa became an anthem for a movement. Their tragedy, as painful as it still is, wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. It proved that sometimes the most powerful legacies are not born from perfect stories, but from the fight to fix the broken ones. The story of Clarke and Lexa will forever be a part of television history. A beautiful but painful reminder of love, loss, and the incredible power of a fandom that refused to let their story die. And that is a legacy worth fighting for. What did the story of Clarke and Lexa mean to you? If you are a shipper of Clexa, let me know in the comments. Share your memories, feelings about it. I'd love to hear them. And if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching and listening. You know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, all that jazz. And thanks so much. Take care until next time. Bye bye.